So I learned something new this week, which is pretty, I know. Do we have anybody who lifts weights? Like, all right, I thought Blake would be it. Tara's it. So I'm not a weightlifter. So if I'm wrong about this, you can just let this knowledge disseminate as it will. Favorite congregant right there. So because I'm not a weightlifter, I've never really wondered about the science behind it. But it turns out that when you really lift heavy weights, the way that your muscle builds is there are these tiny microscopic scars, or what are they called? Tears. Microscopic tears that form in your muscles, and then when you go to sleep, your body repairs those, and then that's how the muscle builds over time. So that's how the person becomes stronger than before. A weightlifter needs to have that heavy resistance in order to grow stronger. Well, our spiritual self isn't much different. Our doubt acts like spiritual resistance. When we wrestle, when we lift tough theological questions, our spiritual muscles are being strained and rebuilt, and we need this kind of resistance built into our faith so that it becomes strong enough over time to see us through whatever difficulty is happening in our lives. Now, there would be some who would teach us and tell us that doubt is the opposite of faith. But that's not really true. Doubt is a natural part of our spiritual growth. And when we wrestle with tough questions and situations, we find that our faith grows. Not because God makes those tough things happen, but in those situations, God is with us, and we do grow stronger. From Genesis 32 this morning. The same night, Jacob got up and took his wives, his maids, and his 11 children and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life is preserved." The sun rose up upon him, and he passed Peniel limping because of his hip. Now, I don't know how much y'all remember about Jacob and his arc of life in the biblical text, but he was not a great person. He was not a great person. He had an older twin brother, Esau, and they did not get along. It started from childhood, but it was mostly because Jacob stole Esau's birthright. And then Jacob tricked their father into giving him a blessing meant for Esau. So once those things happened, Jacob had to skedaddle out of town pretty quick, and he went to his uncle's house, and there he continued to just do some sketchy kind of stuff, was not really great and honest in his dealing with others. His name meant trickster, so that should give you a clue as to what he thought of. Later, when he was married and he had kids, he played his wives and his kids against one another. He had favorites that created a lot of resentment between all of them. And eventually, he finds himself in a position where he and his brother, after decades of being apart, he and his brother Esau are going to be in the same place at the same time. He realizes he needs to make some kind of overtures towards some kind of reconciliation, mostly because he heard that Esau is coming his way with a whole army of men. That would kind of motivate us to make some amends. So the questions are, will his brother be willing to reconcile? Is Jacob doing the right thing in bringing his family to this place? Or should he prepare for Esau's revenge for stealing what should have gone to him? How can he keep his wives and his kids and his servants and his possessions safe? Well, Jacob decides to send a whole bounty of gifts to Esau in the hope that it would quench Esau's thirst for revenge, but he's not really confident that it'll help. He has all sorts of doubts about whether anything he has done or offered that day will help protect him at this point. So he finds himself in a place at night, surrounded by darkness, and is totally and completely alone. Imagine what must have been going through his mind. Where is God? Does God even care about me or the situation I'm in tonight? Or has God abandoned me in this darkness? Now, maybe we haven't stolen from our sibling or been dishonest in our business dealings or tried to bribe our way out of possible slaughter. But we've all questioned where God is. Does God still care? Has God abandoned me? We have all experienced those dark nights where we feel completely alone, and all of our doubts come to the forefront, where we've doubted ourselves, where we've doubted our faith, where we've doubted even God. Now, some would say in difficult situations, oh, you just have to have enough faith. Have y'all ever heard that before? You just have to have enough faith and God will see you through. You have to have enough faith so that God will heal you or your loved one or find you a job or fix your marriage or help your kid or. But what is enough faith? And why can't we doubt that faith will see us through? What is wrong about that? What amount of faith keeps crappy situations from descending upon us and bringing us anxiety and depression and grief and worry and fear? What amount of faith keeps our families always safe and healthy? What amount of faith fixes all the chaos and the crazy making in this beautiful, brutal world that we live in? And what amount of faith is enough so that we're never afraid of all of it happening all over again? What amount is that? The thing about doubt is that it's all part of all the things that happen that we find so hard. It's natural there's nothing wrong with us. Doubt can just be part of who we are, a part of the natural expression of whatever is happening in our lives. It doesn't mean we're lost. It doesn't mean that God will be mad at us. And it certainly doesn't mean that we don't have enough faith. And I won't say that God makes things happen, because that's a whole nother message, friends. I won't say that God makes things happen to make our faith stronger or anything like that, because that's not true. God doesn't make difficult things happen so we can learn some cosmic faith-filled lesson. That's like God sits around like Oprah and randomly starts zapping us like, you get a car and you get a car and you get a car, except, hey, you get cancer and you lose your job and you get a divorce and your kid gets an addiction. Now, grow your faith all nice and strong. Absolutely not. But God is with us when those things happen. Was Jacob wrestling his doubts that night? Was he wrestling himself and his past and his fears for whatever was happening tomorrow? Was he wrestling his faith? Yes. Just yes. And while he did, God was right there wrestling with him, not teaching Jacob some huge lesson, not condemning him for his doubt, not telling him he's weak for his doubts, but being right there with him. The thing about wrestling, besides being really stinky, the thing about wrestling is that it's not a long distance activity. You can't be a mile away from somebody and be wrestling them. It's physical and it's up front and it's personal. And it means that you are so close to that person that you can feel their weight and smell their sweat. Isn't that great to think about? You can feel when they're wearing down and getting exhausted from the struggle, and they can feel when you're getting worn down and exhausted from the struggle. The Hebrew word for wrestle means to get dusty. To get dusty. In this story, not only is Jacob wrestling God, but God is wrestling back, getting dirty in that mud and that dust, fully willing to come along and grapple with all of those things that are running through Jacob's mind on this really dark night, and that each and every one of us have. Wear them out and lift all of us up out of that dirt. In this story, Jacob doesn't run away from God when he's fully in the dark. He doesn't offer some polite platitude, everything happens for a reason, that doesn't help anyone. He grabs hold of that mystery in the dark and throws his full self into that struggle. All of his fears, all of his regret, all of his doubts, all of his faith, he throws it all in there, and he refuses to let go. He hangs on for dear life. Doubt doesn't negate that God is there. He knows God is there. Every muscle ache that he has, every bead of sweat running down his brow, every mouthful of dust that he's spitting out shouts to him that God is there. And with that, he grabs hold of that mystery and he demands his blessing. Not politely asks for it. He demands his blessing. He refuses to let his struggle in until he is satisfied that God is really and truly there with him, and there is nothing wrong with that. Is he unaffected by everything that has occurred? Is he unaffected by his doubts? Is he unaffected by his fears? Unaffected by his past? Absolutely not. He walks with a limp for the rest of his life. But in the darkest, hardest, loneliest night of his life, God showed up for him and blessed him with a new identity, Israel, one who struggles with God. Debbie Thomas, who's an author and a minister, writes about this story. As dawn breaks, the stranger asks Jacob to disengage, and Jacob, tenacious as ever, says, "No, I will not let you go unless you bless me." She says, I love this line. I adore it. I want to make it my life's mantra because it assures me that sometimes winning involves nothing more sophisticated than not giving up. Sometimes the spiritual life is about little more than hanging on for dear life to a God who feels mysterious and nameless and opaque and bewildering and frightening. And sometimes the whole of Christianity comes down saying, there's so much more I can't wrap my head around, but I know there's a blessing in this mess somewhere. I will hang on until I find it. This is both an invitation and a challenge to those of us who think a relationship with God has to be smooth and pretty all of the time. It doesn't. Wrestling is our best protection against apathy. Wrestling keeps God relevant in our lives. It keeps God personal and a force to reckon with, rather than some dusty relic we stick on a shelf somewhere. Friends, God never asks us to live a life free of doubt, only to hold on as best we can when we're right in the middle of it. Amen. Friends, I invite you to pray with me. Gracious and eternal God, we, like Jacob, struggle when confronted with hard things. We use avoidance to shield us from acknowledging and correcting the wrongs we have done and continue to do. Help us consider the impact we have on others and how we can contribute to making life better or worse for those around us. Help us think about ways we can do things better. Lead us into trusting in your love that knows no favorites and embraces us all. Help us shift our attitude and behaviors toward accountability, reconciliation, and love. And help us understand that doubt has a place in our life of faith. Amen.